So Greg, you had what I've been hearing is like the most popular session here at OpTech today. I mean, did you get the same impression from stage?
We had a pretty popular session where we were talking about data and data disruption. And I will point out that they had on the freebie bags at this event patches. And the first patch they ran out of was the data patch.
Yeah, I'm disappointed by that because I did not get in line early enough to get a data patch.
So we had my target audience was here for this.
And from what I heard, because I wasn't able to get in there, this is why I want to have this recap with you, because I want to hear what went on, and everyone else out there who wasn't able to maybe come to OpTech and hear about this. I heard the room was overflowing. Like, I mean, it was that popular a session.
It was pretty packed.
Okay, so who did you have on, and what was the kind of main talking points you had?
So what we really discussed was evolving data world and data disruption and some tips and tricks on making data-driven decisions in an imperfect world. And so in addition to myself, we had an economist from Zillow and a business intelligence person from Continental Properties. So let's bring the owner, operator, developer into the conversation. So different perspectives.
That's what I love about OpTech in general and a lot of these sessions is they're not afraid to bring both sides of the equations together and have a meaningful conversation. And I know you and I have had this conversation quite a bit. You've really turned me on to the fact that multifamily, to a degree anyways, is heading down a path of real uncertainty around what data can be available, what data is reliable, and what data is maybe not going to be gathered much anymore. Was that kind of the core of where you started?
Yeah, we really explored the government data that's out there and the reliability or declining reliability of some of that information and some of the challenges that might be seen moving forward. We also talked about private industry provided data on the state of the marketplace and how that varies from source to source, not really talking about saying this data from this company is better or this is worse, but exploring things like data collection techniques and methodologies and how that can influence the data, and then looking at information that you can pull from internally developed business intelligence platforms and some of the challenges and opportunities that come from those databases.
Interesting. So what are, on a high level, we don't need to recreate the entire thing, but what are some of those challenges that you see looking at this data every day, and what did your panelists kind of bring into it as well?
One thing that we really came up in the conversation over and over and over again is just transparency of understanding how the data that you're looking at is put together and the strengths and weaknesses there, and really the overall conclusion that more is more. And you really can't rely on particular source of data. It's great to actually look at what different sources are saying and not be too focused on what's the specific metric and the specific number. It's, are you telling the same basic story across these different data sources?
Okay, so when you say transparency, just to make sure that I'm understanding this correctly, I believe what you're saying more is the transparency and the understanding of the methodology.
How the information is put together and any biases that might be inherent in that, and really understanding how to interpret the information. And a lot of times data is put out there, particularly from government sources, it will have a stated margin of error there. So realize that a number is not an absolute.
And if anyone wants to get verification of that, look at the jobs numbers and the revisions that happens to jobs numbers, because those initial ones are like, yes, this is a margin error of, 100%.
Yeah. I'll point out, and we made this point when talking about the government data, that those government agencies are doing the best they can with the resources that they have. So it's not perfect data. It's never going to be perfect data. Frankly, it never was perfect data, even though it's sort of viewed as the gold standard really throughout the world, but it has its limitations.
Yeah.
And always have.
Any data set is that way. And it's funny, again, we're here at OpTech, so you see a lot of the different vendors with their t-shirts on that have, their catchphrase and everything else. I don't even remember which one it was, but I saw someone earlier today walking around in a t-shirt that says, the data doesn't lie. And I'm like, the right person can get the data to tell the story they want to tell.
Sure.
So that, yes, to your point.
Center in on this OpTech event, and there have certainly been a lot of sessions, and if you go through the trade show floor, there's a lot of booths. I mean, there's a lot of talk about artificial intelligence.
Yes.
And so one of the key takeaways we had from the session was, hey, we believe in artificial intelligence and the power that's going to bring. But if you have AI and you don't have data governance, then this is problematic. And you have to be feeding in insightful and reliable data, or AI is only going to cause problems if you don't have data governance.
And I'll give a shout out to the crew at RETC. This hasn't been announced yet here at the conference widely, but we're not going to release this before it gets announced. One of the big takeaways from the conference in general is that RETC is putting forth a framework for organizations to think about the meaningful and purposeful implementation of AI, really assessment and implementation of AI in multifamily. And a huge part of that is the governance of the data and the governance of the models within fair housing restrictions and everything else. So it's something the industry really, really needs, in my opinion. Like I said, it's going to be one of the big takeaways from here. But going back to your session, so what I've heard from you, big takeaways so far was the AI governance you just mentioned on there. Really, I would say the acknowledgement of we're coming up in an area of flux in the world of data,
sure,
and you need to acknowledge it. What were the other kind of big takeaways that you just walked out with?
Recognize that data is imperfect, as we've already said, and certainly one of my key takeaways was don't become obsessed with what the absolute number is that you're measuring against, and think about, are you making progress or not? If you're just moving in the right direction and the data can provide you some instruction in that way, then that's valuable information to have.
I didn't know you were going that way, but that's kind of interesting in relationship to the first session we did early in the day, the little 15-minute one, where we actually kind of revealed another KPI, and we're really still digging through this data to really make sure that, but we found two other correlations that were like these leading indicators to, are you going to have leases that are actually not going to fulfill to their totality? But the way we said to follow those is not, here's the number, what's the relative change in that number that we've seen? So that's interesting that it came up again.
Yeah. If you live in data world, that just occurs over and over and over again. The most data-focused people are the least concerned about what the actual number is that you're looking at.
It's the trends and how does it relate. Okay, so the other thing that we need to talk about is, if I remember correctly, when we were talking about this, you had kind of a loaded gun last question for everybody. I'm trying to remember exactly how you phrased it. I'm going to ask you to phrase it. And I know what your answer was, but I'm really curious to hear what the other two panelists' answer to the question is as well.
So we close with takeaways. Are you really thinking about maybe data we love, data we maybe don't love?
Yes, exactly.
Well, I will share that if we're playing good cop, bad cop, I'm definitely the bad cop within this group that we had. That
Okay.
I'm willing to maybe call out a couple of data sets.
For that at all. Like, you've never done that before.
A couple of data sets that that you necessarily want them to go away, but they're so misinterpreted that they're not among the favorites. The one we did talk about significantly on stage is the shelter component of the inflation calculation, which has some value, but if you don't know how to interpret that, can be very, very misleading. And hey, I will call out, of all the data that gets reported on all the time and in our industry, the one that I really do not like is the government's stats on construction activity. And that it is such a small sample set that If you view it over time, it pretty much tells the story, but at any individual point in time, if you look at the private industry data sources on construction, it's just going to be much.
That's something I struggle with, honestly. I don't understand, and maybe you can enlighten me on this. Really, obviously not a part of your session, but so many of these metrics that especially come from the government rely on a methodology that could be so improved if we were using the private data sources to be able to feed into this.
Also point out, defending the government data sources a little bit, if they had the resources to make these improvements, they in fact would. And they know the data can be better, but they're doing the best they can with what they have to work.
That's a fair point. That is a truly fair point. I know when allocations start coming through and looking at budgets, enhancing the data and the reporting coming out of these agencies is usually not on the top of the list for all of those. I also think there's probably, when I really think it through, there's probably some elements of the amount of disruption that would come from all these other organizations that have built these data points into decades of modeling, suddenly have to go back and redo it. That's got to.
That is a factor there, and I will say, looking at some of the data, and particularly at the government data, it's not calculated the best that it could be, but the fact that I have multiple decades of history on this data set is very helpful.
That's where I think my mind was kind of going to, is like, I think the pain of change is far greater than the pain that's existing from the methodology today. So people aren't going to change and aren't going to go.
Before we wrap up the conversation, let me flip this point.
Okay.
And hey, I've been bad cop and talked about some data that I don't like. We also covered the question of what's data that you feel is undervalued and doesn't get as much attention as it should. And for me, the answer there is the information that focuses on consumer financial health.
Yes.
And in particular, I really like some data that the Federal Reserve Bank of New York puts together on household debt overall, and then breaking it down by credit card debt versus auto loan debt and student loan debt and delinquencies, that movement of delinquencies in those payments. I think that is a real indicator of what might lie ahead for the housing market, because if you're going to pay your bills, the first one you usually pay is housing.
Yep.
But if you're struggling on some of these other bills, then that could suggest that housing might struggle in the future.
And to your point, there is a hierarchy to that debt obligations, that housing is going to get paid. You're right, but operators and others could be modeling, like, where is that going up? Like, the first one is, I'm guessing, is probably credit cards.
It moves most quickly, but again, I just love these metrics that focus on the consumer / the renter.
Yeah.
And I think it gives us a lot of insight into what might lie ahead for performance in the industry.
Well, Greg, I appreciate you sitting down with me and actually kind of rehashing this conference session for myself, just very greedily, but also hopefully the whole audience is enjoying it.
Obviously, I can talk about data forever.
And we will. We'll do it again.
Will.
All right, appreciate it.